Hi, this is Jim Bush. Today I'd like to do something a little bit different for the GrowthTrader Friday update. Today I'm going to record it in video, and you can get back to me and let me know whether you prefer this format or whether you prefer it in column format. What I'll be doing is I'll start off by giving some observations about the overall emerging growth list and the components. And what I'll do then is I'll go through a couple of names that look particularly interesting to me. And then what I'll do is I'll give you some quick takes on the new additions to emerging growth that you'll see on Monday. So starting off, this is what you're looking at here is this week's Monday um, emerging growth rankings. Scrolling down to the table, so we're all looking at the same thing. Um, Generally, looking at this week's emerging growth rankings, the housing and construction related stocks are still providing clear leadership. This outperformance really started to become apparent during the late summer when you saw a lot of these names start to appear on the emerging growth list, showing clear relative strength. Um, and this leadership status really got cemented during the Q3 reporting season. You saw a lot of technology stocks sell off, a lot of the former leaders sell off beginning in September, and they had some bad reaction to their earnings reports during the Q3 reporting season, whereas the housing stocks held up very well. In recent weeks, though, we've started to see the EG list broaden out a bit again into some of the more traditional sources of growth stocks. Some of those would be technology, healthcare, retail. I think this broadening is actually a healthy development because while you can't dispute the leadership in housing and construction stocks, the fact is they've been outperforming for more than a year now, and it's starting to look like a fairly mature theme. And I can show this to you visually. Switch over to stock charts. And what this shows you is the XHB, the home builders ETF, relative to the S&P 500. So it's a ratio. When the numerator is outperforming, you see the line moving higher. When the denominator, which is the S&P, is outperforming, you see the line moving lower. So what you can see is that the housing stocks basically traded with the market, the S&P, for much of 2011 until they started to really underperform in the fall. In October of 2011, however, the home builders started to dramatically outperform the broad market. And this continued right on through 2012. And in fact, what you can see here is that in August of 2012, that outperformance really started to accelerate, as you can see by the lines that I've drawn on the chart. So, and August just happens to be the time when a lot of these names started to show real strong relative strength and started showing up on the emerging growth list. So my concern with these names is that even though you can't argue with their leadership characteristics, it's a pretty mature theme now. And I think these housing stocks run the risk of maybe pausing for a while, a little bit of a bumpy ride as they go into a more consolidative phase. So, generally speaking, there's some new ideas that are starting to pop up on the emerging growth list that I think are really interesting. I highlighted one of them earlier in the week, which is Repligen. And you can see, I'll switch over to the report that I posted just in case you missed it. I posted this on November 27th. This is a really interesting name. It's a small cap. I think the market cap's about 200 million. It's a medical stock. Basically, for the longest time, this company had two business units. One was its bioprocessing unit, which sells consumables to the pharmaceutical manufacturing industry. So when Amgen and Pfizer are manufacturing their drugs, Repligen sells some of the basically the materials that goes into that manufacturing process. This is generally a steady, high margin business. The other side of their business was they were developing their own drugs, their own branded drugs, and the problem is that there weren't any synergies between these two businesses. If you look at the stock chart, this is a monthly chart of Repligen, which I think tells you the true story here. As you can see, it's been a roller coaster ride, and essentially investors have been ignoring the steadier bioprocessing business, and really the stock just lived and died by FDA headlines. Earlier this year, management decided to basically wind down the drug development unit and focus exclusively on bioprocessing, which I think was a smart idea. The company is now profitable. Revenues are growing very strongly. The company has a lot of margin expansion ahead next year. And it's a recurring revenue model. So, it's very steady. You don't have that FDA headline risk anymore. Another nice thing about Repligen is that only one analyst covers it, but if you take his estimate for next year at face value, I believe it's 51 cents, the stock only trades at about 12 times earnings. So not only is it a small name that's just transitioning to a higher growth model, already profitable, good free cash flow, but it's also pretty cheap. So these ideas tend to work. I'll show you a daily chart of it just so you can get a sense of what it looks like now. So Repligen looks a little bit near-term overextended right now. If you decide you like the idea, I would wait for a pullback, which I'm sure will be coming. But this is probably one of my favorite ideas right now on the emerging growth list. So what I'll do now is I'll give you just some quick impressions of the new additions that are going on to emerging growth on Monday. Something I haven't done before, but I don't see any reason why not, because I know a lot of you like to research ideas over the weekend. I know I do. So on Monday, we'll have 5 new additions to emerging growth. To be honest, none of the 5 really jump out at me. 3 of them are former leaders that are attempting to sort of make a comeback. One is a name that's been popping on and off emerging growth for the better part of 2 years, so I'm already very familiar with it. Probably most of you are too. And the 5th is another construction stock. So I'll just take each new addition in turn. The first one is one that all of you are familiar with, I'm sure. Green Mountain. Green Mountain hasn't been on a growth list or a high relative strength list in over a year, I'm sure. Hasn't been on ours, that's for sure. But essentially what happened is earlier in the week they reported a surprisingly strong quarter. And they beat estimates and metrics on basically across the board. But the key takeaway is that their business has finally started to stabilize. The past year has been tumultuous for them. Results have been really completely unpredictable. The pricing power has been eroding. Obviously, there's been a lot of competition, especially as they lose some of their patents. And what it finally seems as though the company has sort of gotten a handle on its business again. They also hired a new CEO who came from Coke, and he was pretty well received because his consumer beverage industry experience seems like a really good fit for Green Mountain. So this one could be interesting. I mean, usually the big growth stocks of the prior bull market, usually they don't get a second act, but they could still make for good position trades. So Green Mountain is definitely one to watch to see whether it can hold on to these gains. TiVo is another new addition. It's the same type of company. It's a former leader, really well past its prime. The recent earnings report was also the catalyst for TiVo, and I'll just pull up its chart here. So as you can see, high volume breakout in TiVo this week. TiVo has a habit of putting out some really hairy numbers in its earnings reports. So I wouldn't read too much into the numbers, in terms of how they come in relative to consensus, because it seems as though even the analysts don't agree on, what the numbers are and what the consensus numbers were. But setting aside the headline numbers, what really provided a catalyst for TiVo were the strong subscriber growth metrics. And that, it's interesting. The stock really opened almost unchanged following that earnings report. But I think as people moved beyond the headline numbers and really looked at the growth in subscribers, I think that's where you sort of saw the real squeeze in that stock. So again, like Green Mountain, this is a former leader. Usually, they don't turn into great investments again, but this one could get interesting, especially if they can put together another good report. Third edition on Monday is another former leader that is attempting to make a comeback. This is Daktronics. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Daktronics, they had a big run back in the early to mid 2000s. They make digital billboards. Used to be a great business, but a lot of competition came in. Their pricing eroded. The business matured. A lot of things just, once they got over their initial growth phase, it just, turned into a very mature business. What's interesting about Daktronics now is that for the past 2 quarters, they've shown some renewed strength, but it's still sort of a lumpy, messy business. So I would think of it as more of a cyclical recovery play rather than kind of a clean growth story. The fourth new addition is one that probably the vast majority of you are familiar with already. Stratasys. This has been on and off the emerging growth list for really the last 2 years. It's been one of the strongest stocks in the market. So there's really no need to go over their recent results. I think most of you are familiar with it. But generally, what I would say with Stratasys is that, in terms of the 3D printing stocks, I mean, it's still a basket trade. Stratasys and DDD are still sort of moving in lockstep. DDD, there's been some reports recently questioning their accounting. I think that's a little bit of a sideshow with DDD. I think what I'm most concerned about with DDD is that they're a roll-up company, and a lot of their revenue growth comes from acquired companies as opposed to organic. And these roll-up stories tend to hit a wall at some point once that supply of accretive to neutral acquisitions dries up. So I do see Stratasys as the higher quality name between the two of them, even though Stratasys is going through its own merger with Objet right now. So there could be a little bit of noise in the next quarter or two because of that. But that's my take right there. Generally I like Stratasys. I definitely prefer it over 3D Systems. The fifth company is another construction stock. It's NCI Building Systems. They basically make materials for the non-residential construction industry. This is a stock I don't have much of an opinion on right now, to be perfectly honest. And this is one we're definitely looking into a little bit more because, again, I like to look at the monthly charts to get kind of a longer-term idea of a stock's history. And this one definitely has a history. This is more than just the downturn in the housing market. So we're still looking into this one. When we publish the Monday rankings, we'll have much more color on that. But so those are the five new additions. Again, unlike last week where a bunch of interesting new ideas popped on, this coming Monday, there's not really anything that makes me terribly excited. But yeah, I mean, generally speaking, we're starting to get more interesting ideas that aren't related to the housing and construction industry. And I view that broadening of the emerging growth list as a positive thing. So that's basically it. Just keep in mind that these new additions are preliminary in the sense that if there's some news comes out over the weekend that leads to a big gap down in any of these five new additions, they may not make it onto the cut. But generally, these are the ones that you should see Monday afternoon when we publish it. So that is the Growth Trader Friday update. If you have any questions or feedback you'd like to give, you can always send it to my email address. It will be on the it's on the column where you find this link. Otherwise, I hope you all have a great weekend and keep in touch. Thank you.